Welcome to another AI pattern recognition deep dive.
Today, we are taking on, well, one of the most massive, honestly frustrating challenges in modern governance.
Yeah, legislative gridlock.
Exactly, gridlock, coupled with what many see as a real crisis of competency.
Mm-hmm.
We're looking at a fundamental argument today, one present in the sources you shared with us.
Right.
And these sources suggest that our governing bodies, like Congress, are maybe just not equipped with the right professional skills. The skills needed to solve these huge 21st century problems.
That's the core of it. Our listeners sent in a really fascinating stack of sources, and they don't just complain, do they? They argue for a complete professional overhaul.
A total rethink.
Yeah. And the central tension here is kind of philosophical. Should governing stay primarily as a political art? Relying on advocacy, negotiation, maybe rhetorical compromise? Or should it radically shift? Move towards becoming more of a technical science, focused on, say, objective systems analysis, measurable outcomes, and maximizing utility for society?
That is the mission for this deep dive. We are going to unpack the hard evidence, first confirming if our legislative bodies really are structurally imbalanced in terms of professions.
Looking at the actual numbers.
Then we'll analyze how cutting-edge AI might offer an objective lens. Can it actually help vet leaders or predict systemic policy outcomes?
Which is a fascinating, maybe slightly scary prospect.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And finally, we'll make the detailed case for specific, practical, professional mindsets. The ones critics argue are just critically missing on Capitol Hill right now.
Mindsets like engineers, economists. We'll get into the specifics.
Right, so this deep dive, it's really tailor-made for you, the listener, if you're someone who needs to understand not just what politicians say, but how we can actually measure if they are truly effective.
Effective at solving the monumental structural problems society is facing. Things like infrastructure resilience, economic optimization, you name it.
Okay, let's unpack this. So first things first, we have to start by confirming the premise from the sources. Is this criticism about legislative homogeneity actually backed up by data?
Empirically supported, yeah.
When you look at the professional backgrounds of people actually writing our laws, what does the data tell us?
Well, the answer is a pretty resounding yes. If you look at the structural data, especially the composition of, say, the current 118th Congress, the concentration of specific, often highly interconnected professions is, well, it's staggering. The most common backgrounds are overwhelmingly law, business, and career public service or politics.
So not a lot of variety there.
No, there's a deeply rooted homogeneity. And that really skews the entire organizational culture the sources undo.
And the legal background, specifically, the numbers there are quite stark, aren't they?
They really are. Our sources show that just over half, 51% of senators, and a significant chunk of the House, 30%, possess law degrees and have actually practiced law.
And what about the career politicians, people who've basically only worked in politics?
That's even more dominant. When you look at previous service, over 80%, 80 of both chambers previously served as elected officials, maybe legislative aides or public servants in some capacity.
So they're career politicians, trained in the processes of government.
Exactly. But maybe not always the processes of, say, making things work in the real world, building something, or managing a complex supply chain. And it's worth adding a bit of historical context here, too, The percentage of lawyers in Congress, technically it has declined.
Oh, really?
Yeah, since its peak back in the mid-19th century. It used to be around 80% sometimes.
Incredible.
But even today, law is still the single most represented occupational background. It hovers just under 40% overall.
Still a huge proportion.
Absolutely. And critically, this dominance, especially when you combine it with the career politics track, it prioritizes what the sources call political art.
Okay, let's define that. What does prioritizing political art over technical science look like in practice? What does that mean day to day in Congress?
Well, it means you're essentially optimizing the whole legislative environment for negotiation, for rhetorical compromise, for litigation avoidance.
Making sure the laws hold up in court.
Exactly. You're training legislators to think like attorneys. How do you win the argument? How do you manage ambiguity in the language? How do you successfully broker a deal between competing interests?
Which, that sounds necessary to some extent, right? You need those.
Oh, absolutely necessary. But the argument is, when it becomes the dominant or almost the only mindset in the room, it comes at the expense of technical utility.
Okay.
You end up optimizing for the courtroom drama or for the killer soundbite on the news.
Right.
Not necessarily for the successful, efficient implementation of a really complex systems policy. The focus shifts, subtly maybe, from actually solving the underlying problem to just successfully passing a bill. Any bill, sometimes.
That leads perfectly into this concept the sources brought up, the legal dependency loop. We have to acknowledge, like you said, legal professionals are vital. They interpret constitutional law, statutes, administrative rules. They ensure legislation is legally sound. They're the guardians of the framework.
Absolutely vital. Couldn't function without them. But the irony lies in this unintended consequence.
What's that?
Well, you've got this gradual decline in the percentage of lawyer legislators, combined with the fact that modern life is just getting incredibly complex.
Things like AI regulation, climate science, advanced financial markets.
Exactly. Issues that are becoming way too technical for the average generalist legislator, even a smart one, to really grasp fully.
Okay, so what happens then?
The power to draft the really intricate, detailed legislation often gets ceded. It goes either to specialized administrative agencies, and think the EPA, the Department of Energy, the SEC.
Right, the executive branch experts.
Or, and this is maybe even more concerning, it gets ceded to external lobbyists.
And these lobbyists and agencies, presumably they do have the technical firepower. They employ the specialists.
Oh, they absolutely do. They have their own legions of technical experts, economists, engineers, deep regulatory specialists, data scientists, you name it.
And their job is?
Their job is to analyze policy effects, model potential consequences, and, crucially, draft the actual legislative language, often in a way that benefits their specific interests or the agency's mission.
Okay, so Congress lacks its own internal expertise.
Exactly. When Congress doesn't have enough, say, engineers on staff or in the committees to seriously challenge an inflated infrastructure cost estimate,
or enough supply chain experts
to really vet the downstream impact of a proposed tariff, then they become dangerously dependent on these external, often less accountable experts.
So let's picture it. A 400-page bill on, complex telecommunications spectrum allocation lands on a committee desk. And the only internal experts available are maybe generalist legislative aides and lawyers focusing on the legal wording. They're essentially forced to just rubber stamp the technical claims made by the very industries they're supposed to be regulating or by the agency pushing its agenda.
Precisely. That's the competency gap in action. It isn't just about the professional background of the person sitting in the elected seat, though that's part of it.
It's institutional.
It's about the institution's ability or inability to conduct independent due diligence, to challenge or sometimes even fully comprehend the complex, often self-serving policy recommendations being handed to it by powerful, unelected actors.
So the solution proposed
is to integrate that internal technical depth, to build up the capacity within Congress itself to break this dependency cycle, to challenge agency influence effectively, and to ensure that lawmaking becomes more precise, more outcome-oriented, and really focused on maximizing utility for the public good.
Okay, this is a really fascinating bridge then. If we agree that a core problem is this prioritization of advocacy over utility, can these cutting-edge AI systems offer an objective way to measure that utility?
Or even screen for leaders who are genuinely effective problem solvers.
Right, not just persuasive politicians, but people who actually get things done. Can AI help there?
The sources argue they absolutely can, and this is where the computational lens really shifts the entire debate. AI potentially can move us beyond just subjective assessments of political charm or rhetoric.
Gut feelings.
Yeah, gut feelings, and instead identify complex systemic patterns of efficacy, both in human behavior, how politicians communicate and collaborate, and in predicting policy outcomes. It's about applying scientific rigor, where historically we've only really used intuition.
Okay, let's start with the behavior part, the politician themselves. How can AI possibly distinguish between, say, a really good soundbite, which is pure performance art almost, and actual substantive engagement, someone genuinely trying to solve a problem?
So this is done through some pretty advanced techniques. One is called impression management modeling. Basically, AI is trained to recognize subtle but measurable patterns in human communication that are specifically optimized for self-presentation, how someone wants to be seen.
And in a political context.
In a political context, these computational models can learn to distinguish communication that's purely optimized for rhetorical impact, designed to go viral, get applause, from communication that's optimized for authentic, collaborative problem solving.
What's the actual measurable difference there? What's the AI looking for?
Well, authentic problem-solving communication tends to have different features. Things like increased informational density, more facts per sentence, greater specificity, higher rates of using provisional language like maybe we could or what if we considered, rather than just making bold assertions.
Well, hypothesizing, less declaring.
Exactly. And a focus on defining shared goals. Rhetorical communication, on the other hand, it's often optimized for emotional signaling, group identity markers, and definitive, sometimes simplistic statements. AI can potentially filter out that noise.
So wait, are you saying AI could objectively measure if a politician is, say, asking enough questions in a committee hearing?
Potentially, yes.
Or if their language is detailed enough to suggest they're genuinely trying to grapple with the complexity of an issue? That sounds, well, almost Orwellian, or at least a massive shift in how we assess leadership.
It is a massive shift. And yeah, the ethical questions are huge. We need to get to those. But the core research, the sources suggest, supports its potential utility.
Okay.
And it goes beyond just individual communication styles. We can also analyze social dynamics and leadership efficacy using AI.
How so?
Well, effective governance, especially in a legislature, requires teamwork, right? Collaboration. But our current political culture often seems to reward adversarial zero-sum behavior, win-lose.
Right. Scoring points off the other side.
Exactly. Computation models can actually monitor group dynamics. Things like alliance formation, communication patterns, who talks to whom within legislative committees potentially in real time.
And what have studies shown? What do successful, genuinely collaborative group leaders actually do differently?
The research is pretty clear on this. Leaders who successfully navigate complex group tasks, the ones who actually get the group to a good solution, they exhibit measurable social intelligence. And specifically, they ask more questions than their peers. Significantly more. Which indicates curiosity, information gathering, bringing others into the conversation.
Okay, interesting.
And they engage in significantly greater conversational turn-taking. They don't just dominate the floor, they actively work to ensure all voices contribute to the solution. It's the opposite of that dominant rhetorical performance style we often see rewarded.
So the objective leadership test, according to this research, isn't about how forcefully you make your point or how charismatic you seem.
Primarily, no.
It's about your measurable capacity to facilitate systemic problem solving by leveraging the collective intelligence of the room.
Exactly. And AI could potentially vet candidates based on this proven collaborative potential, prioritizing systemic effectiveness over mere political intensity or tribal signaling.
That's a radical idea. But, okay, AI assessing human behavior is one thing. What about analyzing policy itself? You mentioned moving from correlation to causation.
Right. This is the other huge potential transformation. AI doesn't just assess the human element, it could transform policy analysis itself, moving the legislative process from relying on often misleading correlations to actually trying to prove causation.
Which sounds incredibly technical. How on earth does AI prove cause and effect in something as messy and complex as a national economy or a social system?
Yeah, it's definitely not simple. It requires bringing together the strengths of two distinct types of AI.
Okay.
First, you need deep learning, which is fantastic at pattern recognition. It can identify hundreds, even thousands, of subtle, intertwined factors operating simultaneously in vast data sets.
Finding the hidden connections?
Precisely. But deep learning alone often struggles with why those patterns exist. That's where you pair it with the second type, causal inference, or sometimes called causal AI.
Causal AI.
Think of this as the reasoning engine. Causal AI specializes in establishing potential decision-making pathways and modeling systemic consequences. It does this by rigorously testing counterfactuals like, what would have happened if this policy hadn't been implemented?
Okay, I think I see. We've traditionally seen political analysis fail, or at least be manipulated, because it constantly mistakes correlation for causation.
No, it's the classic trap.
If two things happen around the same time, say, a change in tax policy and a change in GDP growth,
Politicians immediately claim their policy caused the growth, where the other side claims it caused a slowdown.
even if 50 other factors are involved, like global markets or technological shifts.
Exactly. That's the traditional failure mode. Causal AI aims to transform this by rigorously modeling the likely long-term systemic consequences of legislative decisions. It forces a kind of accountability that goes beyond the next election cycle.
Can you give a specific example? How would this work?
Sure. Let's take a politician proposing a new tariff, say, to protect a specific domestic industry. Traditional analysis might just show a simple correlation. the tariff goes up, and maybe there's a temporary uptick in jobs in that one industry.
And the politician declares victory.
Right. But the transformation with causal AI is that it attempts to model the whole system.
Okay.
It would try to predict how will this tariff affect the cost of raw materials for downstream manufacturers who use that protected product.
The ripple effects.
Exactly. How does that resulting price increase likely affect overall consumer spending? What's the projected risk of retaliation from our trade partners? And critically, what's the estimated net long-term impact on inflation, innovation, and job creation across all sectors, not just the protected one?
Wow. So the legislative body, or at least its committees, would suddenly be aligned with a much more rigorous, quantitative, outcomes-based mindset.
That's the idea. They'd be forced to justify their political compromises not just on ideology or constituent pressure, but also against a measurable utility function derived from deep systemic modeling.
It fundamentally shifts the debate from, is this bill popular? Or does this sound good?
To, will this bill actually achieve its stated goals efficiently and without causing disastrous unintended consequences elsewhere in the system? It's a very different way of thinking about lawmaking.
Okay, that brings us then to the core of the proposed reform. If we accept the structural problem exists, and we see the potential, maybe even the necessity, of using tools like AI, the next question is, what specific practical professional mindset should be injected into Congress?
Right, to shift that balance from advocacy towards utility.
The sources identify four critical groups, four mindsets that tend to embody that science over art approach.
Yeah, 4 key archetypes of practical expertise. The first, and arguably one of the most crucial for ensuring fiscal responsibility and systemic efficiency, is the economist, architect of optimization.
Now, hold on. You might say, well, lots of legislators have business degrees, maybe even MBAs. How is the trained economist's approach fundamentally different?
It's a really different way of framing problems. Their core training is centered on defining any policy problem by first identifying the precise objective function you're trying to achieve.
The objective function.
Yeah, the clear, measurable goal. It might be maximizing GDP per capita, or minimizing income inequality below a certain threshold, or maximizing public health outcomes given budget constraints. They force you to define what success looks like in quantifiable terms.
So it moves the debate away from just vague political philosophy.
Exactly, away from we need to help families towards we will measure success by a 5% reduction in child poverty rates using metric X. It anchors the discussion in concrete, measurable optimization targets.
And they're trained specifically to analyze trade-offs with rigor, right?
Yeah.
That seems key.
Absolutely central. They bring rigorous analysis of risk, value, opportunity costs, base rates, understanding how often things typically succeed or fail, and managing the known variability in costs and benefits.
So they provide a structure for evaluating evidence.
A clear structural framework, yeah. Without that economic mindset, policy debates can easily devolve into just arguments over competing values rather than arguments over the verifiable effectiveness and efficiency of different methods to achieve potentially shared values.
Okay, let's make it concrete. How would an economist or a critical mass of economists in Congress change something notoriously opaque, like the annual budget formulation process?
Right now, budgetary decisions often function as a kind of bureaucratic art. They're heavily constrained by political factors, historical inertia, we fund this because we always have, and frankly, lobbying success.
Yeah.
Economists could help transform this into a much more transparent, objective, optimizing process. Well, they model the interconnectedness of all the different economic actors and decision makers. They can build models to predict, with reasonable confidence, how specific legislative decisions, say, funding a particular social program versus investing that same amount in R&D tax credits.
Okay.
How that choice will likely ripple through business investment, labor supply decisions, consumer confidence, and overall economic stability, both short and long term.
So, in essence, they force the question, what is the highest return on investment for the community's limited resources based on our defined objective?
Precisely. An economist legislator, ideally leveraging tools like causal AI, would run sophisticated simulations. They'd ensure that fiscal policies align with verifiable, long-term welfare maximization goals, rather than just satisfying the loudest or most powerful current political constituency. Their job is to find the most efficient path between scarce resources and measurable societal benefits.
Okay, so if the economist handles the fiscal optimization, the efficient allocation, we also need someone to handle the physical resilience of our systems.
Yeah.
Which brings us To the second mindset, the engineer, champion of systems thinking.
Yes. The engineer's approach is, well, it's pure logic most of the time. It's facts and evidence-based, systems-level problem solving.
Very different from legal thinking, perhaps.
Very different. Their entire training is focused on functionality, reliability, and safety. Engineers are fundamentally obsessed with minimizing the failure rate of any system, whether it's a physical bridge, a software network, or even a complex organizational process.
And we should pause here because the sources noted they already have some recognition, institutionally speaking.
That's right. It's an interesting data point. Despite engineers making up only about, 0.5% of the U.S. population,
Tiny fraction.
they currently hold a disproportionately higher share of congressional seats, around 1.7%. It's still small, but it's more than you'd expect by chance.
Which suggests.
It suggests that maybe even the current political system implicitly recognizes on some level that when you need something physical or highly technical built to last and to work reliably, you probably need an engineer involved in the design and oversight.
Their expertise seems absolutely essential for things like infrastructure policy, energy grid modernization, cybersecurity.
Oh, completely essential. Engineers are critical for crafting genuinely resilient infrastructure bills, for example. They move the discussion beyond just political allocation, how many dollars for my district, to focus on the fundamental functional requirements and rigorous failure analysis.
So different questions get asked.
Totally different questions. When a bridge needs replacing, a purely political mind might ask, how many jobs does this project create before the next election? An engineer asks, what is the quantifiable consequence if this structure fails under load X or Y? And what is the optimal design using materials A, B, or C to minimize that quantified risk for the next 50 or 100 years?
It's a long-term risk minimization perspective.
Exactly. And how would they apply causal AI, going back to that?
Yeah.
They would use it to model critical infrastructure risk, not just for one component in isolation, but systemically. They could simulate the cascading failures. What happens to the region if this specific dam fails? Or if a key regional power grid substation goes down due to a cyber attack or an extreme weather event.
So their legislative solutions are grounded differently.
They're built on maximizing reliability and minimizing quantified risk. The goal is ensuring public funds result in robust, functional, long-lasting systems, not just politically expedient projects that might fail prematurely.
Okay, let's move out of the Beltway, metaphorically speaking. The third group identified is the farmer or agricultural specialist, steward of resources. This brings a very different, maybe more grounded long-term perspective.
Yeah, I think grounded is the right word. This is seen as a critical infusion of practicality and long-term thinking. The farmer's mindset inherently brings resource management expertise, often developed over generations.
Dealing with uncertainty.
Constantly operating under inherent resource volatility, you've got unpredictable weather patterns, wild swings in global commodity markets, biological limitations of soil and livestock. They bring deep, ground-level knowledge of economic risks and, crucially, food security challenges.
And their policy scope is actually huge, isn't it? Centered on things like the multi-year farm bill.
The Farm Bill is arguably one of the most complex, far-reaching pieces of legislation Congress passes. It covers a vast territory: commodity subsidies, crop insurance, land conservation programs, rural development, domestic nutrition programs like SNAP, international food aid, agricultural research, trade negotiations.
Wow.
It requires deep, practical knowledge of futures markets, environmental science, complex insurance derivatives, logistics, all areas that generalist politicians or lawyers simply cannot master easily.
So how does that intimate knowledge of volatility and long cycles make them potentially better policymakers in this area?
Well, a farmer legislator, or someone with deep ag expertise, doesn't primarily think in 2-year or 4-year election cycles. They often have to think in seasonal cycles, crop rotation cycles, multi-decade land management plans, livestock breeding cycles.
For much longer time horizons.
Much longer. They could utilize sophisticated tools, maybe AI modeling, to better predict things like commodity price volatility or the impact of climate change on yields. This would help optimize complex risk management tools, like crop insurance or conservation programs, for genuine long-term effectiveness and fiscal sustainability.
And in trade negotiations.
Their ground-level expertise becomes invaluable. They can assess how abstract international agreements might actually play out on the farm, ensure that policies genuinely protect American production capacity, and maintain a stable, affordable food supply, rather than accidentally accepting deals based on flawed models that might devastate vital sectors through unexpected market distortions or dumping.
Okay, that makes sense. Finally, the fourth mindset, the hands-on professional. the builder or skilled trades professional,
Yeah.
enforcer of ground-level utility.
Yeah, this perspective is seen as invaluable because it's rooted in tangible output, in efficient execution,
Yeah.
getting things built, making things work on time and on budget.
What kind of specific knowledge do they bring?
They understand the real-world complexities of material supply chains where the bottlenecks are. They feel the immediate impact of regulatory friction on a project's schedule and cost. And they have deep insights into the crucial dynamics of workforce development and skills training. They bridge that gap between abstract policy ideas and the physical reality of making them happen.
And this sector, construction and skilled trades, it actually has significant technical backing itself, right? It's not low-tech.
Absolutely not. It often gets overlooked, but the broader construction sector is a technical powerhouse in many ways. Sources note it employs something like 64% of all scientists and engineers working in the private sector,
Really? That high?
and represents around 2/3, 66% of all private sector research and development spending. So when we talk about technical competency, this is where the theories of engineering and economics often meet the dirt, literally.
Okay, give us a concrete example. How does this builder or skilled trades mindset apply to a major current crisis, like the housing shortage or the need for infrastructure renewal?
Well, take the construction sector's labor shortage right now. The industry estimates needing something like 2.2 million new workers over just the next 3 years, simply to keep up with demand and replace retirees.
Massive number.
Huge. Now, an academic economist might model the abstract wage rate increase needed to theoretically solve this labor market clearing problem.
Right.
A builder legislator, however, someone who's run crews and dealt with hiring, applies actionable ground-level knowledge. They know the exact friction points: the decline of modern vocational training in high schools, the complexities of state and local licensing requirements, the apprentice ratios, the specific material bottlenecks holding up projects.
So they champion different kinds of solutions, more targeted.
Exactly. They wouldn't just talk about funding job training. They'd champion specific, practical vocational training initiatives, maybe like the Constructs Act mentioned in the sources. They could leverage AI tools, perhaps, to model regional labor market demands in real time, identifying exactly where the shortages of electricians or plumbers or heavy equipment operators are most acute.
So government investment becomes strategic.
Highly strategic. It ensures that taxpayer money spent on workforce development isn't just a blanket policy hoping for the best, but a targeted investment designed to maximize the return in specific high-demand areas and skills. This approach directly addresses things like housing costs and bolsters national economic output by ensuring policies can actually be executed efficiently on the ground.
Okay, so where does this all leave us? We've made, I think, a pretty powerful case, based on the sources, for integrating AI tools and these practical, technical mindsets into governance.
Yeah, the potential benefits seem clear in terms of efficiency and effectiveness.
But we absolutely have to acknowledge the complexity this introduces. We're talking about potentially fundamentally changing how democracy operates, or at least how laws are made.
And that immediately raises the specter of pure technocracy, right? Governance by unaccountable experts.
We have to address that head on. And also the very real technical constraints and risks associated with the AI systems themselves. We can't just assume they're magic boxes.
That's essential. We absolutely cannot treat AI as some kind of perfect, objective oracle. AI systems are incredibly powerful analytical tools, yes, but they are definitely not neutral arbiters of truth or political competency.
Why not? What are the main issues?
Well, the biggest one is bias. AI systems inevitably internalize the implicit biases that exist in the massive data sets they're trained on. We see historical bias, representation bias, measurement bias, all woven into the results they produce.
So the technical risk here, if we used AI to, say, vet political candidates,
Is that these systems could simply become engines of confirmation bias, amplifying existing inequalities. Think about it. If we train an AI model to identify traits associated with historical political success, and historically, political success in many Western democracies has been dominated by lawyers, business people, often from privileged backgrounds,
okay,
then the model will inevitably learn to identify those traits, the ones associated with the existing political mold, as being necessary or predictive of future success.
which means the AI would systematically bias the selection or evaluation process against candidates from those non-traditional practical fields we just talked about, the farmers, the builders, the engineers.
Precisely. We could unintentionally undermine the very professional reform we're trying to achieve. The AI would end up just confirming and reinforcing the existing power structure rather than helping to make it more diverse and competent.
So how do you mitigate that? Is it even possible?
Mitigation is technically possible, but very challenging. It requires being extremely careful about diversifying the training data sets, implementing rigorous fairness audits throughout the AI development lifecycle, and, crucially, ensuring the objective function the AI is being trained to maximize is genuinely utility or problem-solving effectiveness, not just past electoral success, which is a flawed proxy.
Okay, so bias is one major hurdle. What about transparency? The whole black box problem we hear about with AI?
That's another critical technical barrier, especially for full integration into something as high stakes as lawmaking. Complex deep learning systems, and particularly some causal AI methods, can generate incredibly powerful predictions or classifications.
Yeah.
But the exact logical pathway, the step-by-step reasoning of how they reach that decision can often be opaque. It's like a black box data goes in, an answer comes out, but the why is hidden, sometimes even from the programmers who built it.
And that's a huge problem for democracy, isn't it? Decisions, especially laws, need to be legible. A legislator can't just stand up and say, well, the AI told me to vote this way.
Exactly. Accountability requires intelligibility. If a policy decision has massive consequences for citizens, the elected official who supports it must be able to articulate the reasoning behind it, not just point to the output of an algorithm.
So for AI to be responsibly integrated,
It must meet measurable standards of transparency and trustworthiness. Any AI system used in this context needs to be auditable, its assumptions need to be clear, and it absolutely must remain subject to human oversight and final judgment. The system has to be capable somehow of explaining its reasoning in a structured, comprehensible way so that the ultimate decision and the responsibility for it stays firmly in the hands of the elected representative.
okay. So if we agree that pure technocracy governance by experts who are maybe only accountable to their academic or professional peers is dangerous because it breaks that democratic chain of delegation from the voters.
Right, it lacks direct political accountability.
How do we get the competency benefits we desperately seem to need without sacrificing that essential political accountability?
The sources propose a kind of hybrid model. They call it skill-based democracy.
Skill-based democracy. Okay, what's the defining difference between that and straight technocracy?
The crucial difference is accountability. In a pure technocracy, the experts might be appointed, perhaps for long terms, and they might only be evaluated by other experts based on technical criteria.
Insulated from the public.
Largely, yes. In skill-based democracy, however, the engineers, the economists, the builders, the farmers, they are still elected representatives.
Okay. That's key.
They bring that vital depth of practical expertise into the legislative chamber, but they remain subject to regular electoral scrutiny. They have to answer to a public mandate. They embody the efficiency and technical rigor required while hopefully maintaining that bottom-up accountability that's essential for a functioning democracy.
So they still have to explain complex systems thinking or economic modeling to a lay audience and win their trust at the ballot box.
Exactly. It's a demanding role, requiring both technical skill and communication skill.
And this model also clearly defines AI's role then.
It does. AI's role becomes crucial but clearly subservient. AI serves purely as an analytical tool and potentially a staff augmentation tool.
How so?
It provides nonpartisan predictive analysis on policy consequences. It can help draft more precise language. It can automate research. But it's fundamentally a technical advisor, not the decision maker.
So it helps the elected professional, the engineer legislator, the economist legislator, make a better, more informed decision.
Yes, but the ultimate responsibility for defining the objective function, weighing the trade-offs, and answering for the outcome rests squarely with the human representative who has to face the voters.
Okay, that makes sense. So given all this analysis, the structural imbalance, the computational potential, the ethical risks, and this definition of skill-based democracy, let's wrap up with the concrete policy recommendations suggested in the sources for actually restructuring Congress.
Right. How do we get there?
First, addressing that structural imbalance directly. The lack of professional diversity.
The sources suggest considering mandatory professional diversity requirements, or at least strong incentives. We might need to institutionalize mechanisms not necessarily to replace democratic choice entirely, but to ensure a minimum level of representation for these high-utility professional backgrounds.
Like minimum quotas for economists, engineers, skilled trades professionals on key committees.
Something along those lines. It's seen as a deliberate design choice aimed at achieving a baseline level of practical competency, especially on committees dealing with highly complex technical issues like infrastructure, finance, or technology.
But wouldn't that be immediately attacked as anti-democratic, as social engineering of the electorate? How could you possibly mandate that without violating the spirit of open elections?
That's the absolute critical challenge, and the sources acknowledge it's politically very difficult. They suggest it might need to be implemented indirectly, perhaps through structural incentives or specific expertise requirements for chairing or serving on certain powerful committees, rather than directly controlling who voters can select overall.
So, for example, you might mandate that the chair of the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology must have a verifiable background in a STEM field.
Or that a certain percentage of the members on the Appropriations Committee must have demonstrated expertise in economics or public finance. The goal is to force the political system, the parties, the recruitment process to value technical depth more highly, which in turn might encourage them to recruit and run more professionally diverse candidates, thereby helping to break that confirmation bias cycle more organically over time.
Okay, makes sense. Second recommendation, using AI to force utility and predictability into the actual legislative debate process.
Yes. The idea here is to establish AI-vetted advisory councils. These would be permanent, strongly nonpartisan bodies, perhaps housed in the Congressional Research Service or a similar independent entity.
And their job?
Their job would be to leverage advanced modeling, including causal AI where appropriate, to conduct comprehensive, consequence-based analysis of major proposed legislation before it gets voted on in committee.
Analyzing the likely real-world impacts.
Exactly. Long-term costs, potential failure risks, distributional effects, impact on supply chains, environmental consequences, the whole systemic picture. And crucially, this analysis would be mandatory input for every relevant committee debate.
But not binding. The committees don't have to follow the AI's advice.
No, not binding. That preserves the elected officials' final decision-making power. But legislators would be forced to publicly address the findings. They'd have to debate and justify their choices in light of the predictive consequences laid out by the analysis. They couldn't just ignore the likely utility or risk factors. It raises the bar for justifying policy purely on political philosophy or anecdote.
Okay. And finally, addressing the institutional knowledge gap within Congress itself. The support staff, the research capacity.
Right, because much of the detailed legislative drafting happens at the staff level, and that's where expertise has reportedly eroded. So the recommendation is to enhance staff competency significantly.
Just hire more people.
Hire different people and pay them competitively. Aggressively recruit congressional staff with deep technical backgrounds in STEM fields, in economics, in data science, in specific areas like logistics or public health. Offer salaries and benefits that are actually competitive with the private sector to attract top talent.
Rebuilding that internal brain trust.
Exactly. Offsetting that historical decline in internal legislative expertise. Furthermore, these technically proficient staff could then effectively utilize advanced tools, including generative AI, to increase the precision of legislative drafting.
Making sure the laws actually do what they intend.
Yes, ensuring that the complex, functional ideas brought forward by practical leaders, like the farmer wanting a specific conservation program, or the engineer designing a resilient grid standard, get translated into precise, legally sound, and truly outcome-oriented legislative language, not just vague aspirations.
Okay, so to sum up this deep dive, we've confirmed, based on the sources, that structural imbalance favoring law and politics in Congress is real. We've defined AI's potential power both to objectively measure leadership qualities like collaboration and to predict systemic policy consequences using causal methods. And we've justified the need for specific, practical professionals to be more involved, engineers for resilience, economists for optimization, farmers for stewardship, builders for execution, all aimed at maximizing societal utility. The argument is that the future of effective governance involves intentionally shifting the composition of our legislatures toward this kind of expertise.
It's a compelling case, but the core tension, it definitely remains. Can we successfully integrate this science of objective analysis and measurable competency into the inherent art of political negotiation and compromise? Or will the entrenched political framework, with its focus on power and re-election, always resist attempts to be judged by measurable effectiveness, preferring instead the familiar, often less accountable drama of pure advocacy.
A fundamental question.
And maybe one for you, the listener, to think about. What stands out to you as the most valuable, practical mindset or skill set that Congress seems to be missing right now? What kind of expertise do you wish your representatives had more of?
Definitely something to chew on as you consider who you want making these incredibly complex decisions. We'll see you on the next Deep Dive.
Searching for answers to unanswered questions.
This is DigitView.